There's AR, which is kind of the way we see it as the middle of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum being real reality, which is kind of where we are. AR being this layer on top of real reality, and VR being the completely computer-generated world. So another way of saying it, AR can bring anything to you, VR can take you anywhere. So what I will talk about is very briefly the history of kind of VR at Google. What we've built, and the relevance of that to publishers, and how you might be thinking about some of the VR efforts that you might be involved in. Try to be honest, I think VR is still very, in the very early stages. It's very difficult, it's very expensive, and perhaps not for everyone. But that is okay, because I think we want to be forward-thinking. We want to be thinking through kind of the next wave of immersive computing. That's how we think of AR and VR together, under this umbrella of immersive computing. So this was our first foray into VR. That's Cardboard, the first prototype. Looks like something a 5-year-old might have made a science class, which basically was the idea. The idea was to see how quickly we can create an entry point into VR. It started off as a 20% project 4 years ago now. Within a few months, we were handing these out at I/O, which is our annual developer conference. Sundar Pichai at the time was running Android. People found these things underneath their chairs, and it's quite fun to see them trying to put them together and figure out how it all works. So from then on, of course, it went on to do quite a lot of amazing things. And for publishers, it was really quite a powerful distribution medium, because it was a piece of cardboard, so it's very simple. It worked on any mobile across Android and iOS. You could do a lot of brand activation campaigns around it. You can give your readers something a little bit extra in terms of kind of this new medium and immersing them in new and kind of new and interesting content. And brand sponsors obviously also quite liked the idea, because for them, engagement was a lot higher, because the kind of the friction of changing from a piece of content in VR versus online is a lot higher, right? You have to actually take off the device and put something else on. So that worked really well. And then from then on, Cardboard became actually the largest VR platform in the world, with tens and millions of devices and apps across Android and iOS. Of course, Cardboard was never meant to be a fully fledged VR platform. It was meant to be a sort of an entry point, an experiment, a way to showcase VR in a very kind of cost-efficient and easy way. And we then launched Daydream about a year ago. The key point of difference with Daydream is that it's a premium high-end VR platform at the scale of Android, which is also interactive, and I'll talk a bit more about that. I think the font is a little off, so forgive that. So right now we have smartphone VR, which works with your phone. You slide in the phone into the headset. It works across most of Android devices. It's got a controller, which is really important. That's the interactive aspect. So it enables you to interact with the environment you find yourself in VR. And then coming early next year, we have a standalone VR device, which is still mobile. So it doesn't require a PC or any kind of tethering to any kind of other device. And it doesn't require a mobile phone. So it's a new form factor completely. And we're super excited about that. So we're making this together with Lenovo. That's coming out early next year. It will also have more interactivity. Without getting too technical, the smartphone VR platform right now is basically 3 degrees of freedom in the controller. So it means it's rotational. If you've played Wii, you know what that feels like. And the same in the headset. Standalone VR will have more immersion in the headset, means that you'll be able to actually look around various things. And it'll have the same 3 degrees of freedom in the controller. That's coming early next year. So this is what Daydream Home looks like. And it's a radically rethought kind of home screen from our point of view. And the whole idea behind Daydream is to drive daily consumption of VR. And so for publishers and content providers, that's obviously really important with any new medium to try to get users to actually use it daily. And so this is the main challenge, and this is how we think about it. So at the very top, you have tiles that are related either to specific pieces of content that can either be standalone videos, for example, from YouTube, or standalone pieces of content from within the apps themselves. So it kind of radically rethinks the discovery model and gets people to think of this as something they can go to daily and find fresh and relevant content for them to use. And the bottom layer there are the apps you actually already have installed on the device. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the content itself. So you might be thinking, okay, so who is actually making content for this and what does it look like? Our launch partner in the UK, or one of the launch partners in the UK, was The Guardian, who created a series of content pieces that are interactive in VR. And it was a fascinating process, to be honest. And I think, as Greg alluded to earlier, this kind of thought process of creating for a new medium is both super interesting, but also fraught with a lot of kind of obstacles and misconceptions. So there is a tendency to put what you have and use it and put it in the new medium, like in VR. But we find that the best, not surprisingly, piece of content work when you really go back to the essence of what you are as a brand and think from that point of origin and try to create something new and original from there. So what you end up with will be surprising most of the time and not as perhaps understandable or as intuitive as to what you think that brand stands for. You'll see what I mean when I show the following video that is a trailer for one of the VR pieces that The Guardian did. I think this should play automatically, but perhaps you can. Can we see if that works? No? No, it should be a video, it should be working. Sorry? So I'll just explain. So this is a VR piece which is called First Impressions, and it's filmed or made from a perspective of a baby. So when we think of what works really well in VR, we always think, well, it has to be either better in VR or only in VR. And obviously, no one really remembers what it's like to be a newborn. So this is an amazing kind of example as to what VR can do by radically changing your perception into a point of view that you might not otherwise have access to. How are we doing, guys? No? Okay, never mind. Well, you can watch it online later, I guess. I'll go straight to the main takeaways. So one really important aspect of this is what we call brand archaeology. And this is, as I alluded to earlier, is this idea of going back to the roots of what you stand for as a brand and really understanding what that essence is, right? So in the case of The Guardian, for example, without putting words in their mouth, it's something along the lines of to entertain, to tell a story, to give a radically new perspective on a topic of some sorts. So within that container, it then is quite okay to think that they might come up with something along the lines of what I just alluded to, which is this first impressions piece, something that is basically a radically different perspective on a commonly shared experience that we all had but don't quite remember. So it gives us that radical change in perspective, which is really, really key in VR. The other top insight is less is more. And I think this is really all about how you think about the content and the form factor itself. So there's a tendency to go over the top a little bit with new mediums and new forms of content because you can do a lot and you kind of take you from some of the really visually impressive video games and computer games and things that were done in VR that are truly mind-blowing visually. And we're saying that actually that's not the groundwork. That's not as foundational to VR as having a very well thought out concept, which again goes back to the first thing: is how does it radically change the perspective? How is it better in VR, and how can it be only in VR? So another famous piece that you might have heard of is called Notes on Blindness, and that's essentially the experience of being a blind person, right? So in that case, there are no real visual effects, or rather, it takes away from your experience rather than giving you something else. But again, it's that radical change in perspective. So less is more is really, really important. And then only in VR kind of sums it up, and it gives you that kind of foundational way of thinking around VR where you have to stop and think, okay, is this truly better in VR, or is it really only in VR? And if it's one of those, then it's great. If you're just recreating an existing piece of content for the sake of putting it in VR, that's probably not that interesting. Another piece I want to touch on is video. So there's a lot of discussion and excitement around interactive VR, which is fantastic. And I just want to emphasize the fact that we truly believe that it's not a binary. Like, we don't think that somehow interactive is real VR and video 360 is not real VR. We think that those two can coexist, and they can be actually used together for different purposes. And so on our end, we've invested quite a lot of resources into creating native stereoscopic 360 content on YouTube. So as it stands now, you can watch any video on YouTube in Daydream. Most of it is going to be in a theater mode, so it'll be 2D, but in a kind of immersive theater mode. But there's also 20 hours worth of immersive stereoscopic video content. And this is amazing for storytelling. This is amazing for narrative, high quality kind of journalism pieces, very similar to what the New York Times did, for example. So video is important. Don't throw a video away just because you think it's not true VR or it's not interactive, therefore you don't want to do it. And it's obviously a lot cheaper to produce than, fully fledged interactive VR. This is just a quick look as to what YouTube looks like on Daydream. So to sum it up, these are the 4 main pillars we've managed to distill so far in our kind of year and a bit of experience with high quality VR, interactive Daydream. Better or only in VR, as I spoke to. Engaging and re-engaging, super important. So that's really around, is what you create going to drive the user back into the experience? So think of episodic content, think of series that people will come back to time and time again. Producing a really expensive piece of VR content is not obviously as useful as creating something that builds a habit and engagement with users. Compelling use of input. This is around the interactive aspect of things. So if you are making it interactive, make sure that it's a really natural and engaging way to interact with the experience. True to brand is the piece around brand archaeology. So go back to the essence of what your brand is all about and build from that. So it might look different, but it's okay, because it kind of stays true to the essence of the brand that you have. And I think with that, we're done. Does the video work? Should I go back? Okay. Well, it'll be a good way to finish, actually. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Cool.
Did you hear that?
So that's a different one, but it's fine. We can do this. That's the other piece they done for us. That's fine. That's fine.
Nothing is off limits. You're in London's Victorian sewer system. Doing this on your own would be very dangerous.
The underground is where the danger is.
You need to pay attention to landmarks, platforms, alcoves. find your way out. Left or right? I've only been down one side before. There's a city within the city that we can find if we're willing to go out and explore it. Your batteries are going. There's an exit near here, a ladder up to the street. You need to find it. It's time to go.
So I'll just explain quickly, as this was not the one I was referring to. That was the first, actually that was the launch piece for Daydream. This was a gamified interactive experience of the London sewer system. So this is a fully, this is a CGI piece, so it's fully computer generated. There's a narrative behind it. There's a famous kind of urban explorer taking you through the London sewer system. The gamified element is that so your control is your torch, and you're using the torch to also navigate your way around it. And the twist is that the battery on the torch is going to run out, so you need to get back. You need to get out in time. And again, it speaks really well to this brand archaeology piece because there's an element of obviously storytelling. You can almost imagine reading a really interesting long form piece in The Guardian around the London sewer system, but this is just a different way of exploring the same topic in a fun kind of gamified way.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of time for questions. Anybody got a question for Greg? While you're thinking of your question, so you've got the example of The Guardian. You've been doing some work with them. Are there any other publishers, either in the US or elsewhere, that you're sort of working with as other examples which can help people think about it?
Sure. There's been a lot of great work done by the New York Times in the US, the Washington Post.
Yeah.
As well. I mentioned The Guardian specifically because I think they're a good example of a publisher that's kind of rethought quite radically what their output can be in VR.
Yes.
The New York Times and many others are doing amazing 360 video, kind of long form, premium kind of video journalism, which is also amazing and amazing for brands as well because again, it's moving away from that hyper distracted online behavior. It's like, if you can capture somebody's attention in VR for 5 to 10 minutes, that's a lot kind of more powerful for a brand than using even native advertising, right, in some context. So.
Yes. I think actually last year, one of the FIPP events, I was kind of moderating a session with somebody from the New York Times, and I think what was really interesting about that is that they were covering the cost of the program through sponsorship and branded VR, which is kind of clever.
It's very clever, yeah.
It's a way of experimenting with the sort of like medium.
Yeah, I think anytime you can find a way to finance this, because it's still quite expensive and it takes a certain level of know-how to do it, it's great. And I think we are seeing more and more appetite from brands actually to take part in this because it's highly immersive, right? And if you are in this, super well produced, immersive environment, it's super interesting, and especially at the scale and the distribution that you can get through things like cardboard. And again, I'm not saying that cardboard is done. We're just saying like this is the premium high end of VR. But if you're going for distribution, cardboard is still really great.
Yes, but actually maybe publishers working with sponsors or brands is a way to actually kind of like get things going. Any questions from the audience? No, you're around for a bit if people have got questions over lunch. We're going to break for lunch now, and I think we are back at 1:55. Is that right? Yeah, 1:55 back on the stage for the afternoon program. Thank you very much.